Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. The Quran does not prohibit the paying of interest. It prohibits charging of interest. Never in its corpus has it ever said that the paying of interest is prohibited. So the question arises that how has this notion developed in our ummah, and why is it that paying of interest and consuming interest both of them are regarded to be prohibited? So, as I said, the Quran has unequivocally said that only charging of interest, only consuming of interest is prohibited as far as giving interest is concerned, paying interest is concerned, which of course takes place when we take an interest-based loan. We have to give it back not only the original amount, but also over and above that amount, which is called interest. Ustaz Javed Ahmad Ghamidi has pointed this out, that this issue has primarily arisen because of a hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the reason that it has arisen from that narrative is that there is a certain translation of a word which is done to imply the fact that paying of interest is equally forbidden. According to his principles, he says that if there is some prohibition which is mentioned in a narrative, in a hadith, which is not found in the Quran or the dictates of sense and reason and established norms, then it is essential to find out its basis in these norms or in the Quran, because a hadith cannot independently prohibit something, and it is not of the stature that it should. It is only that it has to be a corollary of what is already mentioned in the Quran or in some other established source or established principles of sense and reason. Now, since this narrative says that, or allegedly says that the paying of interest is also forbidden, so it has to be understood, and apparently it is adding to the prohibition of the Quran, because the Quran only regards the charging of interest, the taking of interest, the consuming of interest to be forbidden. It never says that paying of interest is also forbidden. So Ustaz says that if paying of interest is to be forbidden with regard to a narrative of the Prophet which says that the Prophet actually cursed those people who take riba, which means that they charge riba, or who pay riba, who give riba, and further we have also these words that those who write its document and those who bear witness to its document. So the word mukil is used to mean that people who pay interest are also condemned and cursed by the Prophet. Now, if this narrative is to be taken in this meaning, then Ustaz Ghamidi says that this can only be possible if this narrative is understood to mean that when at the state level interest, the whole business of interest has been abolished, and banks and everything have now converted into some other Islamic means of financing, or their own operation does not have the element of interest, or in other words, when interest has been prohibited at the state level, only then this narrative can be taken to mean, or in particular the word mukil can be taken to mean that a person who pays interest, a person who charges interest, a person who writes its document, a person who bears witness to it, they are all doing it against the law. So in this case, this narrative would actually relate to that fundamental principle that the law of the land cannot be broken. And hence, if the translation of this narrative is such that the word mukil is to be translated as the person who pays interest, then the whole narrative has to be related to a situation in which the law is something which is, of course, always meant to be kept supreme. And if this happens, then the law shall be broken. So this statement of the Prophet is actually telling us when at the state level interest has been prohibited, then anyone who charges interest, anyone who pays interest, anyone who writes a document of interest, anyone who bears witness to a document of interest, they all are prohibited. So in this case, we find that there is this relationship of the narrative with an established principle, which of course is that the law cannot be violated. Ustaz Ghamidi also says that the word mukil has another meaning as well. Just as it can be taken to mean the person who pays interest, the other meaning is that a person who helps in paying interest, or a person who makes other people pay interest, or a person who is an agent who on behalf of people who charge interest gathers other people and brings them to the person who gives interest, and of course later on they also go and they ask the people who have taken this loan that to give that back, not only the loan but also over and above that amount. So they are the ones who solicit interest as well. So if this translation of the word of this hadith is to be taken, then it will relate to scenarios in which the interest situation is still existing in a country. People are charging interest, or banks of course are charging interest, and then there are agents of bankers which actually try to give this interest on their behalf, or this interest-based loan on their behalf. Now in this case, in this scenario, paying of interest is not even mentioned in this narrative, because the word mukil will then not mean paying of interest, but in fact it would mean people who gather other people, who are actually agents of those people who charge interest. So the translation in this case would be that the Prophet of God has cursed people who take interest, and cursed people who on their behalf are agents, and curse people who write a document, and of course curse people who bear witness. And in this case, of course, again we have to relate this to some original principle in the Quran. Remember, it is essential, if this is to be regarded as prohibited, then we have to have some original basis. As far as charging of interest is concerned, of course, this is already found in the Quran. As far as people who are as agents of people who charge interest are concerned, which is the translation of the word mukil is concerned, then we also have a basis of this in the Quran, and that is people who cooperate with those people who do something bad or evil are also to be stopped from doing that. So that's a principle which is already mentioned in the Quran, which is called ta'awun al-ithm, which means cooperation with evil. So therefore, in this case, the word mukil would mean people as agents who gather people and give them this loan based on interest, because they are doing this on behalf of those people who are charging interest. So therefore, they are cooperating with them. So for example, today, the all staff of bankers or banks which is involved in these transactions, and such that they give these loans and then extract interest on these loans, they all shall be considered as facilitators or cooperators in evil. So in this case, the narrative shall be related, or this part of the narrative shall be related to this verse of the Quran as well. So the bottom line is that whenever a narrative prohibits something which is not found, or apparently not found in the Quran, or in dictates of sense and reason established principles, then it has to be rejected. Otherwise, we have to find its foundation in these sources. So what he has done is, what Ustaz has done is, that if the word mukil is meant to mean a person who pays interest, of course this is something which can be translated of this word. But then because paying of interest has not been prohibited in the Quran, we will have to find out some foundation. And the foundation that Ustaz has presented here is that when interest is abolished at the state level, when the whole business of interest is totally extirpated from the state level, it is here that this hadith tells us that therefore when people still indulge in this business, whether they are paying interest or whether they are consuming interest, then they are going against the law. So in this case, this narrative will relate to the fact that the law of the land cannot be violated. And if the second translation is taken, which is of course of the word mukil, which would mean agents of people who give interest, then this will relate to this common scenario as exists today in most third world countries, in which interest-based transactions or banks are still going on. In such cases, paying of interest is not even the meaning of this narrative here. This narrative is actually just prohibiting the consuming of interest, and those who are agents of these people, and those who write the script or the document of loan, and those who bear witness. In this case, in this second translation, the word paying does not even come into account. So in this case, as is the general case today in most countries, paying of interest has not been prohibited at all. And therefore, in these situations, if people take loans for their personal use, for their private use, for any means, it is perfectly allowed, and it cannot bear the stamp of prohibition. अकूलु क़ौली हाज़ा वस्तग़फ़िरुल्लाह ली व लकुम व लिसाइरिल मुस्लिमीना वल मुस्लिमात।